All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ramarea. I'm also from Botswana. I graduated last year from my master's program, and I will go into more details during the talk on my background. But very honored to be here today and for the opportunity to give a presentation. So today I'm going to be sharing briefly on my journey to this point, and also just sharing some lessons learned from my job search, because as students, we often try to stay for a little while after to get some experience. So I'm going to share some lessons and tips from what I've learned. So yeah, as I've mentioned, I'm going to be sharing my journey and the lessons. And there are three main points that I hope to communicate and raise today. So the first one is that developing and understanding one's professional objective is basically half the battle when it comes to seeking jobs, as it allows one to be able to pivot in the face of short-term setbacks. It's important to be prepared, to be patient, and to be persistent. And then we are also always stronger together. So like the job search process is very difficult. And so it's very important to lean in on your networks. And then it's also important for us when we are on the other side to be helpful to these networks and help other Botswana who are coming from behind us. I think the lessons from this conversation can be summarized with 5 Ps. So professional objective, being prepared, patient, pace, persistence, and then of course, poparano, which means togetherness. I just wanted to show this 5 pula coin. Yeah, so the structure of the presentation is I'm just gonna go through the professional journey, my job search experience, and offer some closing reflection. Yeah, so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna jump into it. So I think about my professional journey as studying from when I was still a young kid. So I was the 8th born of 9 in what I call the upper lower class. And so basically I grew up in Kanye, which is a village in southern Botswana. And by American standards, you would say my family was poor, but by the standards there, I would say we were doing fairly well. I was a talkative and restless child, and I asked a lot of questions. And so a lot of times the adults in my life would get really annoyed and frustrated with me. So one of my older brothers homeschooled me and taught me to read and write when I was young, so that they can just keep me preoccupied with like books and reading material. And then the same thing happened when I started primary school. I used to cause a lot of trouble because I was ahead of my other peers, so I didn't need a lot of help. So my teachers would like give me a lot of books to read. So I was always a curious child, and I think that really put me ahead of my peers, and it always sort of helped me like to be where I am today. And I like to say that I'm very lucky, and that means at a lot of different points in my life when I was faced with opportunities, I was always prepared. Thanks in part to being set up for success. So I think junior secondary school was where I kind of started to begin to have an idea of what I wanted to do with my life professionally. I went to a school called Mogami Junior Secondary School, and I think there I was worshipped. I like to say I was worshipped and cherished because I was very smart, and I used to win a lot of competitions for my school at different competitions. But they also they had very high expectations in terms of behavior. I remember one time I got whipped because I was one of the students who took more bread than they should have. But I think it's one of the things that helped me get to where I am today. Senior secondary school was a different experience because I went to Seapapito, which is one of the, at least at the time, I don't know about today, but at the time it was one of the worst schools in the country. There was a lot of indiscipline, demotivated teachers and students alike. But I was very fortunate that I had teachers who were willing to support my goal. My goal at the time was to get the Top Achiever Scholarship. and to go study in the UK. At the time, I wanted to study in the UK. And I think that during this time of my life, because of this curiosity, I started to get into this loop of observing things in my environment and asking questions. And one of the biggest things that came out of it was I started to realize that I was actually ashamed of my family's socioeconomic standing. I remember some examples of just moments like that where I was ashamed and frustrated. One of them is walking to school when it was raining, and I only had plastic to cover myself because my family didn't have an umbrella. And the other one is going to school at Sapapito because my family couldn't afford to send me to boarding school at Mueding. And the only thing that we would have had to pay for was just my own separate toiletries. But it was, now it seems like trivial, but then it was a very big financial consideration. And this shame, it made me realize in a lot of ways that I don't think I was made for poverty and hardship. I like the soft life. But even more generally at a societal level, I think that it pained me just to see other people struggling for the basics, including my family. And so I started to become very curious about this idea of ending economic poverty and inequality. And so I think this sort of was that beginning of that professional objective. So remember I mentioned earlier that I had this goal to get Top Achievers Scholarship, which at the time you needed 4 A stars in order to be eligible for it, but I missed it by a single point. I had 3 A stars instead of 4. And that was, it was a very difficult point in my life at the time. It felt like my whole life was over, basically. But I was inspired by one of my friends. His name is Batu Madirele. So when we were at Sapapito, Batu had chronic renal failure. And so there was this whole nationwide fundraising campaign to raise money for his operation. But what was really inspiring about Batu was instead of just sitting back and let people raise the funds, he was right there in the middle of it all. And one of the things that he taught me is that we have our destiny in our hands. And so I sort of started to try and apply to different scholarships and, through embassies. I even applied to the Mastercard Foundation Scholarship, and I got a lot of rejections. And I started to write a lot about it online, about how my life was difficult. Everything was not going according to plan. And then one of my friend, her name is Kaho, she found out about the United World College, which is basically this high school where you can do the IB. And then at the time, I wasn't really keen on doing the IB, but because I was hoping there was a way I could just directly go to university. But I ended up applying for UWC and I got in. And so that was how I came to end up leaving Botswana. So I went to UWC in Costa Rica for my IB. And when I was in UWC, I'm sure this crowd can relate, the experience of of transitioning from being a big fish in a small pond to being a big fish in a vast ocean. Because I think we still continue to be big fish. We're just kind of, it's a different scale. And Costa Rica was beautiful, but I will say it was a very hard experience. There was a lot of homesickness, and it took a lot of friends kind of helping me. And then after I was settled in, I think I started to thrive. And 2 years is not a very long period of time. The same with 4 years. I know for people who are in college right now, they might think that there's a lot of time. But it all goes by pretty quickly, and very soon you're going to have to start thinking about those jobs, right? And so when it was time for me to apply to universities, I sort of aimed a little lower because after missing the Top Achiever Scholarship, I think my confidence was sort of eroded a bit. But one of my college counselors sort of encouraged me to sign up for an interview with Harvard. They had come to our campus to like interview people who were applying to that school. I was not planning to apply to Harvard, but I ended up interviewing anyways. And then I submitted an application. And at the time, I did not take SAT subject tests because I think they were optional. And then what happened was Harvard ended up deferring my application, and that gave me the confidence to apply to Stanford, because I felt, oh, if I could be deferred by Harvard, that means there's, something worth considering. In the end, I didn't get into Harvard, and that was fine because, with these things, you just need one thing to work out. So I guess there were some key lessons from this experience, which I think are also very important when it comes to the job search post-college. The first one was that, it's important to have the humility to aim lower if needed, especially because even if I had not gotten into Stanford, I had applied to other schools where my probability of getting in was higher, right? So if that had not worked out, I would have gone to a school in the US, and some might argue that might have opened some doors for me. The other lesson is to still have the boldness to follow your wildest dreams, right? Even when you lower your expectations, you should still continue to apply to those things that you really, really want, in addition to the things that, you are likely to get. So I got into Stanford, as already mentioned, and I actually got the Mastercard Foundation Scholarship this time. I had failed to get it in 2013. And the way that I like to summarize my experience of Stanford, it felt like living on a resort, and just kind of chasing my curiosity to the ends of the earth. I think part of what, got me to see it this way is that because I almost didn't apply, it felt like what's the way to phrase this? It felt like I shouldn't have been there. So it's sort of like an adventure. It's it's a bonus, right? And so I just kind of did everything that really intrigued me. So during my time there, I spent 2 summers in Sri Lanka, working with a nonprofit called Sarvodaya. And there I was basically just trying to understand community-driven socioeconomic development. So basically what this organization does is they work with different communities, and they sort of help them with resources, but the communities sort of decide what problems they want to solve in their own community and how they're going to go about doing that. And a great lesson from that experience for me, at least, was that, our communities don't need us to identify their problems or even solutions to the problems. What they need from us, as students who have been sent abroad, is the skills and the access, right? And then just to collaborate with them in solving those problems and harnessing the different opportunities. I also spent some time in Ghana and Rwanda through the Mastercard Foundation, just kind of exploring how Indigenous and Western knowledge can allow us to solve global problems at local levels. I did some research that took me to Kenya, studying entrepreneurship and innovation. And I discovered, I did discover, because I don't think I believed this before then, that, Africa is the heartland of innovation. It has been, it is, and it's always going to be. And I think all these things sort of inspired me to start thinking about what skills and access can I bring to this journey of innovation, to enable other people on the African continent to be able to solve local problems and harness local opportunities. And I think that this very much influenced what I ended up studying at Stanford for both my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. And I changed my majors a few times during that journey. I started trying to study econ. And then at one point I switched to mathematics and eventually ended up studying industrial engineering. And at the core of all this, I was interested in learning how to use common sense principles and models just to abstractly represent and solve complex problems. And a problem of interest that I had that I really wanted to solve is related to my beef with poverty and economic inequality. And it's this question of how do we optimally allocate resources when we have uncertain information, right? So, decision making under uncertainty, basically. And that's what I focused on in my master's degree. It was decision and risk analysis. And I came to the decision that my professional objective is to help people and organizations make higher quality decisions. This is in part because I hope that, when people are better able to allocate resources, we can move away from, or at least we can mitigate a lot of the injustice that we have. So post Stanford, I will share a little bit after this on the actual process of looking for jobs. But for now, I work as an associate product operations manager at Crikey, which is a Web3 entertainment company that builds augmented reality games and social media experiences. And on that team, I basically just help the team make higher quality decisions by supporting data-driven decision-making through maintaining a robust user experience research function, market research and product analytics processes, and also overseeing the continual evaluation and optimization of team processes. Now I will transition over to talking about my job search experiences. So I want to start by saying, finding jobs as an international student is hard, right? Never mind what the companies say, and they will claim that they are equal opportunity employers. But, any company that asks you and uses that as a basis for whether or not they're going to invite you for an interview, whether you'll need sponsorship in the future, I don't know if they can claim themselves to be an equal opportunity employer. But that said, I also want to say that, our career game is long, and visa consideration aside, I think we have time. So this means that even if sometimes there's one path that you want to go into, if it's very difficult to go into that specific path, I think it's fine to pivot to something else and then find your way back to the path that you wanted to go to. And part of this is because, it's easy and it's very common these days to switch different jobs and companies. So part of the reason why I spent all that time at the beginning to sort of share with you how I came to my professional objective is because I fundamentally believe that when we have a clear professional objective, it's easier to find roles that are aligned to that, right? And that professional objective is going to change over time. So, and that's still okay, right? So when I got out of school with that professional objective of helping people and organizations make better decisions, I sort of I sat down and I asked myself this question, right? What are different roles that I can go into that will allow me to fulfill this objective that I have, right? So I looked into data analyst, data science roles, management consulting, investment analyst, product management, and I applied to different roles in all these different possible career paths. And I got a lot of rejections. I am not going to lie to you. I got a lot of rejections. And there were times actually where I even thought about just packing up and going back to Botswana because I just couldn't take it anymore. But eventually, it worked out. I ended up getting my current job. But part of getting that job, it took a really long time to get there, right? And then another thing is how did I find openings and choose which companies to apply to? So this one, I'm sure a lot of people know that, usually maybe through your university career office. My university used a platform called Handshake, but I also use LinkedIn. Sometimes with the big companies, you can just go directly to their websites, if there's a company that you want to work for. And I spoke to a lot of people, right? So I went on my LinkedIn, but also just tapped into my personal networks to speak with people who work in these different roles at these different companies just to get their experiences. So that when I'm applying, number one, I decide is this a company or a role that sounds like it's the right fit for me? And number two, I kind of get an idea of what it is that they are looking for, right? And then in my process, I also made sure to prioritize companies that have had hired international students in the past or were willing to sponsor, because there's no use in wasting your time in a company that has not proven in the past that they do hire international students. And then when it comes to applying, I think it's important to apply even if your credentials don't match the job description. I mean, if anything, like in the worst case scenario, you might end up just having like an interview practice. I think that's also important, even if you don't end up getting it. I think it's important to customize the resume to match the role you're applying to. So in the beginning, I used to apply with one resume for all different jobs. But then when I started customizing it, making sure to use the keywords that are in the description, I started to have a better callback rate, right? And this makes sense because like a lot of these companies at that first stage, they use algorithms to like pick which profile they're going to invite for an interview. So at that point, at least you want to maximize the probability that your resume is going to match the keywords, right? But you don't want to tell lies. So you want to make sure that you represent the truth about your experiences in a way that's as close to the description as possible without embellishing. And then in a lot of cases, the cover letter is optional. My recommendation is to write the cover letter, even in that case, right? The reason for this is that from your resume, the company is going to be assessing whether or not you have the professional competence, the skills they need. But I think the cover letter is an opportunity for you to communicate to the company that you have, the cultural fit and you are sort of the kind of person that they are looking for. So on your cover letter, you want to focus on why you are a right person for that company based on your understanding of their mission, their values, their culture, but also why that company is right for you based on your professional objectives, where you're trying to go and where you are right now. And then this is a fact. Some companies will ghost you when you apply, but just keep applying. Eventually some will respond. And then when it comes to the interview, my recommendations are, a lot of interviews, of course, interviews are different, but I think there are some general questions that are always asked in most interviews. So beforehand, my recommendation is just make sure that you prepare answers to a lot of these common questions and make sure you have examples to substantiate the points that you're raising. And you want to study for technical interviews. So for a lot of roles these days, there's always like a technical interview. If it's for data science roles, for example, they might give you like a coding challenge. If it's for product management, they might also give you like a writing challenge, a problem solving challenge, and an analytical question. So you want to practice, you want to learn the different frameworks that they use in each industry. And then you want to make sure that you're practicing with friends and practicing with people who are working in that space or have either interviewed or had some experience in that space so that they can give you feedback and you can continue to improve and iterate. And then during the interview, you want to make sure that you're asking questions because you're also evaluating the company. Of course, like as international students, I think we're not always in a position where we can be too choosy, but I still think that there are some, companies where you will interview with them and you're just like, yeah, I don't think I want to work at this company. And then my recommendation is to always ask for feedback on your interview performance. This will help you to get better at future interviews. And most of the time, the interviewer is not going to give you the feedback, but I think like when you get the feedback, it's very, very helpful. And then I have other tips for approaching the job search. So applying is a full-time job, right? So you want to make sure that you are keeping track of the different statuses of these applications because you'll be applying for one. There's another that has a deadline that's coming up. You have an interview to prepare for a different role, and then a written challenge you have to submit. So it's very helpful to have a very organized system so that nothing falls through the cracks. And then you also want to prepare for a period of no income because, when we're in school, sometimes we have a stipend, but then after that, when we're still looking for the job, we may not have a source of income. So you want to make sure that you prepare for that, you save for it, you cut costs where possible. If you can, you stay with friends and host families, and then you utilize, other resources that are available to sort of cushion the financial pressure. You can use food banks. But with all these other, resources, you also want to be careful not to share your information, like especially your names and stuff, just because sometimes there are some, like if you use some public benefits, there might be like immigration consequences down the road. So you just kind of want to stay clear of that. And then for a lot of us, you find that we also have responsibilities back home. So you want to make a plan for your dependents, even if it's just like, letting them know that like, oh, in 6 months' time, I'm going to be looking for jobs. I want to be having a steady source of income. So you guys might have to like figure out alternate arrangements in that time period. And then you want to make sure that you have a robust support system, right? Because there's a lot of rejections, which can really, I don't know, like at least for me, like those rejections, like they just made me feel very hopeless at times. And then, of course, like you want to have a support system like during that period of no income as well. Just like two, main closing reflections is that, as I've tried to demonstrate in my presentation today, we can't do this by ourselves, right? So we need the support of our family, of our friends, and our friendly strangers. And I'm really glad that you guys are building this Bosna network, and I hope that in the future, Bosna alumni, they'll be able to also help support, other new Botswana who are coming up during these periods of transition. And then another thing is just to say, like, there are many ways of giving back to our country, including returning home, knowledge and skills transfer, and connecting your people to your network. So I know like there's usually like a lot of pressure with people asking, when are you going back? When you go back? I think sometimes when it comes to, figuring out your career, it's fine to just, remember that you have time. You have the rest of your life to give back, and also your personal dreams matter. So, those also deserve your attention. That is my presentation. Thank you. I'll open it up for questions.
Well, in that case, then I don't have a question. I guess I'll just say thank you for the presentation. It was really nice to just follow the journey from where it started to where it is now. It's quite inspirational because like the speaker shared, is it Tumisang? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name properly.
Yes, Tumisang.
Yes. Yeah, the journey can be quite challenging, and it's nice to hear somebody who went through those challenges and how he overcome them. So yeah, it's pretty inspirational, and of course quite insightful in terms of the specifics regarding job application and all of that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's always my pleasure to share my experiences, just because I think that we learn from each other's experiences. As we say, oh man, I forgot this thing about, there's a tree metaphor that I was going to use from in Setswana that I'm blanking on. Yeah, I remembered it, man. Yeah, dilo makwati, tikwata buluto makawala. So, like dilo makwati. So, likwati of a tree. It's like there's like a part of the tree that comes off if you peel it of the trunk. So It's sort of this idea that like, we learn from each other, but the phrase is like, yeah, you peel knowledge from other people. That's sort of the literal translation.
You kept mentioning at some point that you were applying for, I'd say 4. Yeah, can you please, like, if you can go share your screen again once more and go to that slide where you're showing like data science and like product management? Because my question is, out of all of those, right? Sure, like you would have picked the job that came first or the offer that came first. Like, what was your preference? Like personally, like regardless of like the whole do whatever it takes to survive aspect of this whole ordeal, like what would you have preferred?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this is like, I guess what one of the areas where my engineering really shows through. I think for me, the way that I've always approached this question, it's not so much, okay, what's the title that I want to have? It's like, what's the work that I want to do, right? And I think as I was going into this thing, I was like, okay, what's a job where I think I'm going to, I can be able to really, support decision making at scale and have impact. And I think as I like when I started, I was kind of indifferent. I was like, yeah, I could go either way. But as I started interviewing and gathering data and experience and talking to people, I realized that actually of all of these, data analyst was like my least preferred, right? Because it's like I felt that I was going to be doing more, I'm going to be doing more decision support, but not at the scale that I would like to do it at, right? And like coding more than I would have liked to. And then with investment analyst, it was really exciting because there's a lot of ambiguity, and I love ambiguity, but I didn't really like the hours, right? Because like these people were working like, I don't know, like 70, 80 hours a week. And I would have taken it if it was the only job that I could get, but it was not my most preferred either. And then consulting and product management, I think with consulting, I liked the fact that, there's a lot of travel. I like going to different places. But at the same time, I didn't like the project-based approach to the work in the consulting as an industry, right? Like I felt like I wanted to be part of one project for a really long time, like with one set team instead of just like different clients every couple months. And so product management was sort of like my top choice because it has that ambiguity that you find in investment analyst, but there's also the decision support that you get from the data analyst role. But you work on one project or like at least like a few projects for a long time with the same team. And yeah, so for me, like product management was my top choice, and by luck, it ended up being the one that worked out.
Okay, that makes sense. And I like how you broke down each, into its, core I guess features. That's something for some of us to learn from. I'll go ahead and ask the second question here. And I like how you're breaking this down to like a depth, right? That you kind of like make people understand more than just what's on the surface, right? So if you could please do that again with this next question, I would appreciate it. So the question is this. I would like you to run us through your gap management, You kept mentioning that like when students are about to graduate, right, they should prepare for the gap between graduating and getting a job. And then you kept saying plus no, you said no funds or something. Am I correct? Something like that.
Yeah, like basically preparing for a period of no income.
Yeah, but like the question now is like you suggested, hey, you should have like a support system, you should save, you should, I guess, budget, you should compromise, maybe, buy less or whatever, something like that, something of that sort. Like, what exactly did that look like for you? Like, where were you at right after graduation when you were out of the campus? Okay, the campus is gone, you're no longer, allowed back in school for free, right? There's no jobs. Like where were you calling home?
That's a great question. So I think I'm just gonna go back to the home screen for this one. I think the thing. So I think it's important to point out that so I had the Mastercard Foundation Scholarship for my undergrad, but for my master's degree, I actually had to work to fund it. So I was working for the university as a teaching assistant, and they were paying my tuition and then paying me a very low income. Oh my goodness, I don't know how I survived on that. But I think because I always knew that that period was coming, I sort of started to, just like put aside some money that was going to cover things like rent, and then things like groceries, and then also made sure that I was going to be able to send some money home. And I remember one of the things so when I was like doing all these calculations, I had banked on the hope that I was going to get a signing bonus when I finally got my job, right? And then turned out my company didn't have a signing bonus. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like I remember I was going to start my work in July of 2021. And I had enough money to last me until, I think like right close to the end of July. And one thing that I had not accounted for was that, so my lease at my apartment was going to expire. So I had to find another new place in the month of July. And then there were all these considerations, like thinking about security deposits for the new place. Because even though I started working in July, my first pay, like in the middle of July, my first paycheck was like, I think the very last week of July, and I had all these expenses come up. And at one point I was even like trying to take out loans. I was trying to take out, a personal loan to like just carry me through those moving expenses. And being an international student, I think like the bank like declined my loan application. And to be honest, like, I borrowed money from some friends, but even then it still wasn't enough. Fortunately, my tax refund came back and I was able to like bridge that gap to cover the moving expenses. But I will tell you, man, like there were times when I would just sit down and I was like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do. And I think, with these big expenses like rent and like, moving, security deposits, those ones are very hard, right? Because like it's impossible to avoid them. So and that's part of why I'm like, I prepared, but even my preparation I think wasn't enough. So my advice is to like just like really think for other people who are still in school to just like think about all the possible expenses and try to plan for them. Now looking back, there's actually a part of me that's like, I think I would have been better off if I had like stayed with some friends. But even then, it's always an awkward thing, right? Like to be like, yo, can I come crash on your couch for a few weeks? But I think at least the challenge for us as Botswana in the diaspora is, back home you can just go live with your aunt, but here it's not as easy. And I think that maybe the challenge for us is to be that for each other, right? Like be the cousin that someone can say, hey, like I'm not gonna be able to have rent. Can I give up my place and come crash on your couch? So I don't know if that answers your question to your satisfaction, but that's my best attempt.
All right. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you very much for mentioning that because I interact with a lot of people in the community, and part of the question was selfish because I wanted to figure out personally if you've been through it, right? Because some of the stories we talk about when I'm with these people, like we came to a conclusion and said, look, we actually need to talk about this on a platform that's bigger than us, because people need to hear what's going on in the background. And I think you just gave us a glimpse. And there's actually more to what you just said. And hopefully when we create this new segment, maybe we'll call it "You Never Believe What I'm About to Say." Or whatever we call it. We hope that you will join us the same way you blessed us with your presence today. And again, thank you very much, Ramarea. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
Kanye and Tito, do you guys have like any last words for our guest?
I just want to say thank you so much for just like, even from the first time I reached out, you were just so open to answering any of our questions and being open to prepare such a thorough like slide deck and just being open to answering anything we had. I think it was very, very helpful. For me, like personally, I am very worried about what happens after, despite like how straightforward it seems when like we speak to our advisors. They just like, oh, that's when you have to start looking for internships, and you kind of know what to do, but we don't realize how tedious the processes actually are. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
To be honest, there isn't really much I'd say apart from like thanking. I'm really grateful that you took your time out of your busy schedule to come and be with us today, to come and give us the insightful and very, very, very inspirational presentation. Thank you so much for blessing us with your presence.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.